The little orc girl trembled from the cold as she sat in the mud, holding out her old coat to the human farmer and whispering, "Mom fainted from hunger again." But Carlos had no idea that just minutes later, when he stepped into that miserable little room, he would meet the orc woman who would completely change his life forever. The girl was shaking. She sat in the mud at the edge of the road, small knees pulled to her chest, green skin pale from the cold. She couldn't have been older than 7, maybe younger. Hunger had a way of making children look older than they were, like fruit left too long in the sun. In her hands, she held a coat. It was thick wool, hand-sewn, patched in 3 places along the collar. Someone had sewn it with real care. The kind of care that takes hours, bends over lamplight, bleeds fingers. Carlos saw her from the saddle before he heard her. He was riding through the lower quarter of Dustfall, the part of the frontier town that most men with money never entered. He hadn't planned to ride this way. He'd only wanted to see people, to breathe something other than silence and ledger ink. His farm was the largest in the territory. He had full cellars and fat cattle and workers who called him Sir. He also had rooms that hadn't been entered in 2 years, and a quiet that pressed against his chest some nights like a stone. He was 33 years old, and already felt like an old man. He almost rode past her, but then she lifted her head and said, "Buy my coat, mister. Mama fainted from hunger again." Her voice was thin, it didn't beg, it didn't shake. It simply stated a fact, the way you'd tell someone the sky was grey. Carlos stopped. His horse shifted under him, restless on the cold cobblestones. He looked down at the girl properly for the first time. 2 small tusks at the corners of her mouth, barely visible, pointed ears pressed flat against her head, dark eyes that held something ancient and exhausted. He hadn't spoken to an orc in years. Not since the war ended. The frontier had gone quiet after that, the quiet of people who'd stopped fighting out loud but never stopped hating. "Your mama?" he said. "She's in the room. She was fine this morning. Then she wasn't." The girl looked down at the coat. "This is the best thing we have. It's worth buying." Carlos felt something hit him in a place he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pity. Something older and stranger than pity. He climbed down from his horse. The girl watched him without flinching. She held out the coat with both hands like an offering. The wool was clean despite everything. Someone had washed it recently, scrubbing out the smell of poverty with what little soap remained. "How long has she been like this?" Carlos asked. "Since yesterday," the girl said. "But she's been getting weaker for weeks." "Are there others? Family?" "No." "Just that?" "No." He looked at the patched seams on the coat, the careful stitching along each hem. This wasn't made in a factory. This was made by someone who'd measured the size of their child with their hands and cut the fabric by memory. "Who made this?" he asked. "Mama did," the girl said. "Before she got sick, she made it so I wouldn't be cold." Carlos stood there for a moment in the freezing street, holding nothing, feeling something he hadn't felt in 2 years break loose inside his chest. He didn't understand it yet. He just knew he wasn't getting back on that horse and riding away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Chloe," she said. "I'm Carlos." She nodded once, as if she'd already decided something about him. "Can I meet your mama?" he asked. Chloe studied his face. She was 7 years old and already knew how to read a man. It was the kind of knowledge no child should have to carry. Then she said, "Buy the coat first." He paid her more than the coat was worth. He knew it the moment he pressed the coins into her small hand. He saw it in the way her eyes went still, not with gratitude, but with the careful arithmetic of someone who'd learned that generosity from strangers usually came with a price. She counted the coins without looking away from him. "This is too much," she said. "It's what it's worth to me," Carlos said. "It's old and patched." "I know." She stared at him a little longer. Then she tucked the coins carefully into a fold of her worn dress and looked down at the coat in his hands, like she was saying goodbye to something she'd carried close for a long time. "She'll be glad a kind person got it," Chloe said. Carlos didn't know what to do with that sentence. He just held the coat and followed the girl through the narrow streets of Dustfall's lower quarter. He'd lived in this town's shadow his whole life, ridden through the main street 100 times, sold grain at the mill, drunk coffee at the corner house, but he'd never come this way. Down here the buildings leaned against each other like tired men. The windows were stuffed with rags instead of glass. The mud between the stones was black and deep. He passed 2 women who looked away when they saw him, a man sleeping in a doorway, a dog that watched him with patient, worried eyes. Chloe walked ahead without turning back, trusting him to follow. That trust made him feel heavier than the coat in his arms. She led him into a building that had once been a lodging house. The front door hung on a single hinge. Inside, the stairs creaked so badly he placed each foot at the edges near the wall where the wood was stronger. "She might be sleeping," Chloe said quietly. "Sometimes she sleeps between the faintings. Sometimes she doesn't wake up for a long time." "How long is a long time?" "Once it was all night." Carlos said nothing. He followed her up to a door at the end of a dark hallway that smelled of rot and coal dust. Chloe pushed it open. The room was small. Not small the way a poor man's room is small, smaller than that. A cot, a wooden chair with a broken back. A single candle burned down to almost nothing. One small window with a crack along the glass, sealed with a strip of old leather. On the cot, beneath a thin blanket, a woman lay very still. Carlos stopped in the doorway. She was an orc, but that was the last thing he saw, and it took him a moment to understand why. She was too thin, her collarbone pressed sharp against her skin. Her hands, resting over the blanket, had the look of hands that had worked for years, and then one day simply stopped. Her face was turned slightly away, dark hair, loose, spread across the pillow, even here, even like this. There was something about the way she lay that was not defeated. She looked like someone who'd fought for a very long time and was simply resting. Then Chloe whispered, "Mama!" The woman stirred, slowly turned her head, and looked at Carlos. He felt it before he understood it. That strange sensation of a door he hadn't known existed, swinging quietly open somewhere inside him. She blinked. Her eyes were dark amber like old honey. They moved from Chloe to Carlos, and in that single glance he watched her become alert, afraid, and proud all at once. She tried to sit up. "Don't," Carlos said, more gently than he'd intended. She ignored him and sat up anyway. "Chloe." Her voice was rougher than it should have been, still firm. "I told you not to go out alone." "I know, Mama." "Then why?" "Because you hadn't eaten in 2 days." The girl said it plainly, without accusation, just the fact. "I sold the coat." The woman looked at Carlos. He was still holding it. "Give it back," she said. "It was a fair trade," Carlos said. "I don't know you." "No. My name is Carlos. I have a farm north of town. I came here because—" He stopped. He hadn't planned this far. "Because Chloe asked me to come." The woman looked at her daughter. Something passed between them, some silent language of eyes and breath that he wasn't meant to understand. "You should go," she said to Carlos. "I'd like to help." "I'm not asking for help." "I know," he said. "I'm offering it anyway." She held his gaze with the particular flatness of someone who has been offered things before, always at a price. He recognized that look from a different context. His father had worn it sometimes, toward certain men who came around the farm with smiles that didn't match their eyes. "What do you want in return?" she asked. "Nothing. Nobody offers nothing." "I'm not nobody," Carlos said. Then, realizing how that sounded, "I only meant, I'm not that kind of man." Chloe sat on the edge of the cot beside her mother and watched them both. Carlos noticed that the girl had stopped shivering. The room was cold, but something else had changed. The small tension she'd been carrying on her shoulders since the moment he'd found her had loosened slightly. "Your daughter gave up the warmest thing she owned to feed you," Carlos said. She came out alone in the cold to sell it. She didn't beg. She didn't ask for charity. She walked up to a stranger and made him a fair offer. He paused. "You raised her that way. I can see it." The woman said nothing, but something in her jaw changed. "She told me you fainted," Carlos said, "and that you've been getting weaker for weeks." The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe looked down at her hands. The woman looked at her daughter with something unguarded and terrible in her eyes, a kind of love so exhausted it had almost become grief. "Let me bring food," Carlos said. "Just that, one meal, and someone to look at you. We don't need a doctor. There's a healer in town. Helena, she's good. She doesn't charge people who can't pay." "Then why are you here?" she asked. "If the healer helps people for free, why come through you?" It was a fair question. He thought about it honestly. "Because Chloe led me here," he said, "and I don't think that happened by accident." She stared at him for a long moment. He held her gaze. He wasn't trying to convince her. He was just standing there, in a doorway that smelled like cold stone and old candle wax, holding a child's coat in his hands, waiting. Finally, very quietly, she said, "One meal." "One meal," he agreed. He turned and went back down the creaking stairs. Behind him, he heard Chloe say softly, "He seemed honest, Mama." And her mother, quieter still, "I know. That's what worries me." Owen was waiting near the market square with the horses, chewing on a piece of dried beef and looking at the sky like a man who has learned to expect trouble. He was 20 years older than Carlos, grey at the temples, with the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. He'd worked the farm since Carlos's father was alive. He knew the land better than anyone. He also knew Carlos better than most, which meant he recognized immediately, when he saw the man walking back toward him, that something had happened. "You look like you found something that changed your mind about something," Owen said. "I need food. Real food, not hardtack. Bread, if there's a baker still open. Broth. Something hot." Carlos was already untying the saddlebag. "And find Helena Marsh. Tell her I need her. Tell her there's a woman in the lower quarter who hasn't eaten properly in days and has a fever." Owen was quiet for a moment. "The woman orc," he said. Carlos looked up. "I was watching from the square," Owen said without apology. "Saw you follow the little one. And then you know what I saw." "I know what I saw from the outside." Owen handed him the rest of the dried beef. "What did you see on the inside?" Carlos thought about the room, the candle, the hands on the blanket. "A woman who's been surviving alone for too long," he said, "and a girl who carried more weight than she should have to. That's all." Owen studied him. "All right," the old man said. "I'll find Helena." The bread was still warm from the oven. The baker's wife added a jar of honey without being asked, saying nothing, just pressing it into Owen's hands with the expression of someone who preferred not to explain their kindness. Carlos carried it all back himself. He didn't send a worker. He didn't want her to open the door to a stranger. He wanted it to be him, because he'd made a promise. And promises meant more when the person who made them showed up to keep them. When he knocked, Chloe opened the door immediately. She'd been listening for his steps. Her eyes went to the bread. She tried not to show it, but he saw. The way her nostrils flared slightly, the way her hands closed and opened at her sides, the body's memory of hunger kicking in before the mind could stop it. "Come in," she said, very formally, like a small host receiving a guest. Inside, the woman had moved from the cot to the chair. She sat with a straight back and watched him set the food on the floor. There was no table, with the expression of someone receiving something they hadn't asked for and weren't sure how to hold. Helena arrived 15 minutes later. She was small, grey-haired, carried her bag like it was part of her arm. She asked Carlos and Chloe to step into the hallway while she examined the woman. Chloe sat on the floor of the hallway with her back against the wall and began eating bread in small, careful bites, as if rationing even now. Carlos sat beside her. She always pretends she already ate, Chloe said after a while. Carlos looked at her. How long has she been doing that? I knew she was lying, the girl said. I knew for a long time, but I didn't say anything because if I said something she'd stop lying and then she'd starve faster. She looked at the bread in her hands. So I just ate my part and tried to leave some, but she always made me finish it. Carlos felt the back of his throat tighten. He was 33 years old. His farm had 3 grain cellars. He had 2 horses and 14 workers and a cook fire that burned every morning before dawn. He sat in the dark hallway and said nothing and felt ashamed in a way that had no target and no remedy. The door opened. Helena stepped out, closed it softly behind her. She's burning up, she said. Malnourished. Probably been sick for 2 weeks, maybe 3. She looked at Carlos. She can't stay here. He asked her himself. He went back into the room, crouched beside the chair where she sat, and looked at her directly. Not down at her, directly. I have a farm north of town, he said. 15 minutes by cart. It's warm. There's a room. Helena can come every day. You'd have your own space. You and Chloe. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the floor between them. Her breathing was careful, the kind of careful that means it costs something. I won't owe you, she said. You won't. If I stay, it's not because I'm grateful. It's because my daughter needs me alive. I understand. And if I want to leave, I leave. Whenever you want, Carlos said. I'll saddle the horse myself. She was quiet again. Then, what do you get from this? He thought about lying, about saying nothing, or giving some easy answer about neighbor helping neighbor, the old frontier tradition, something clean and comfortable. But she was watching him the way someone watches a man across a card table, not hostile, just precise, and he knew she'd hear the lie underneath the words. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I found your daughter in the street and something in me stopped. I don't know what to call that, but I know I can't walk away from it. A long silence. What's your name? He asked. I realized I never asked. She looked at him. Mira, she said. He nodded. Mira. He said it once inside his head, the way you note a word you want to remember. All right, she said. We'll come. The cart ride was slow. Owen drove, steady and silent. Chloe fell asleep almost immediately, curled against the sacks of grain, her face finally loose and unguarded in sleep. Carlos sat across from Mira and watched her watch the dark road. She held onto the edge of the cart with one hand. Her knuckles were pale with the effort of staying upright. You can lean against the side, he said. I'm fine. You're not, he said, but all right. She almost smiled at that. It wasn't a smile he could point to, just a slight shift at the corner of her mouth, so small he might have imagined it. The farm appeared out of the dark, the main house, the barn lanterns, the long, low shape of the grain cellar, warm light in the windows. He'd sent Owen's wife ahead with a message, and he could see she'd lit the hearths. When Mira saw the house, she went very still. He watched her take it in, the size of it, the solidity, the light coming out of every window. And he watched something flicker across her face that wasn't quite envy and wasn't quite awe. It was older than both of those. It was the look of someone who had stopped letting themselves imagine what warmth felt like. He helped her down from the cart. She didn't refuse his hand this time. When their fingers touched, neither of them made anything of it, but Carlos noticed. He noticed the way she pulled her hand back once she was standing, the way she stood for just a moment without moving, like someone deciding whether to trust the ground beneath her feet. He didn't say anything. He just walked toward the house and held the door open and waited. Chloe stumbled in half asleep, barely noticing anything. Mira paused on the threshold, then she stepped inside. The room he gave her had a fireplace. He showed her and Chloe to 2 rooms side by side, small ones near the back of the house, away from the noise of the workers at dawn. They had proper beds and wool blankets and windows that closed all the way. Chloe stood in the middle of her room and turned in a slow circle, looking at the ceiling and the walls. "There's a bed," she said, as if reporting a discovery. "There is," Carlos said. "And the door locks?" "From the inside." She nodded seriously. "Good. Mama needs to know the door locks from the inside." He told Mira that the door locked from the inside. She didn't respond, but he saw her hand move to the iron bolt, turn it once, then back. Helena came at dawn the next morning and stayed for 2 hours. She left a list of herbs and instructions. No standing for long periods, broth before solid food, rest, warmth, water. Carlos sent Owen's wife to the market with the list. He sat outside on the porch with a cup of cold coffee and watched the sun come up over the fields. His farm had been quiet for 2 years. He told himself he liked the quiet. He'd built habits around it, early rising, long walks through the fields at dusk, solitary meals. He'd told himself it was the life of a man who preferred his own company. Sitting there that morning, listening to Chloe's voice through the thin wall, she was talking to herself, describing something in the room, narrating her own discovery of the space. He understood that he hadn't liked the quiet at all. He'd just stopped noticing it. In the days that followed, he kept his distance from Mira's room. Helena checked in every morning. Owen's wife brought meals. Carlos left things by the door, sometimes a book, once a pair of proper wool socks, once a small jar of the honey that Owen had been given by the baker's wife. He didn't knock. He just left them and went away. Chloe, meanwhile, had discovered the farm. She moved through it the way children move through new places, with her whole body, touching things, asking their names, watching the animals with intense concentration. The chickens tolerated her. The old draft horse allowed her to lay her head against his flank. She watched the hands work the south field and asked questions until they were forced to answer her. Within a week, she knew all their names. She also found Carlos at his work whenever possible, appearing at his elbow in the barn or the cellar with some new piece of information. That the east fence had a loose post, that the brown hen was sitting on eggs that hadn't hatched, that the water in the north trough tasted different from the water in the south. He began to listen for her footsteps. On the 8th day, Mira appeared at breakfast. She walked carefully, one hand trailing the wall, but she walked. She sat at the end of the long table in the kitchen, away from the workers, and ate a full bowl of porridge without stopping. Nobody stared. Carlos had spoken to the hands beforehand, quietly, without making it a speech. He'd simply said, "There are guests staying at the farm, and they'll be treated like anyone else who eats at my table." The hands had nodded and asked no questions. That morning, Mira looked up once while she was eating, and found Carlos watching her from the doorway. She held his gaze for a moment. He looked away first. The second week passed, then the third. Mira grew stronger slowly, the way a river rises, gradually enough that you didn't notice until one day you looked and saw that the banks had changed. She began walking outside at dusk. Just the yard at first, then the path beside the barn, then the long way around the grain cellar and back. Sometimes Carlos joined her. He didn't plan it. He'd be finishing some task near the barn, and she'd appear heading toward the back path, and he'd fall into step beside her, and for a while they'd walk without saying much. She had a way of asking questions that came out of nowhere and landed somewhere unexpected. One evening she asked, "When did you stop having people around?" He was quiet for a moment. "After my parents died," he said. 2 years ago, within 6 months of each other. First my father, then my mother. Were you close to them?" "To my father. My mother was harder to know. She loved in a way that didn't always look like love." Mira looked at the darkening field. "I know that kind," she said. He asked about her husband carefully, not pressing, just opening the door. "His name was Darren," she said. "He died 3 years ago. Fever took him in 2 weeks." She paused. He was a good man, funny, patient with Chloe in a way that exhausted him, but that he never complained about. She looked at the ground. "After him, it got harder. I already wasn't trusted. Orc in a human town. After I was also a widow, people felt safe to show me what they really thought. I'm sorry, Carlos said. Don't be sorry for what other people did. I'm sorry it happened. I'm not apologizing on their behalf. He stopped walking. There's a difference. She stopped too, looked at him. It was almost dark now. The first stars were showing above the tree line. You say things carefully, she said. I try. Most men don't bother. Most men aren't trying to earn your trust, he said. And then immediately, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to sound like, it doesn't sound like anything bad, she said. It sounds honest. She started walking again. I don't know what to do with that. He fell back into step beside her. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. Just keep walking, same as we're doing. She nodded once. They came back around the far end of the barn in time to see Chloe sitting on the fence rail, eating an apple, narrating something to the draft horse, who regarded her with calm indifference. Mira stopped walking. She stood and watched her daughter. Carlos watched Mira. The expression on her face was something he hadn't seen there before, unclenched, open, raw in its simplicity. A mother watching a child be safe, that particular quality of love. She talked to that horse for 40 minutes yesterday, Carlos said. I timed it. Mira made a sound. Short, quiet, involuntary. It took him a moment to realize it was a laugh. Not a full one, not yet. Just the beginning shape of one, slipping out before she could catch it, but it was real. He tucked it away carefully, the way you tuck away something small that might be important later. Chloe asked him on a Tuesday. He was oiling a saddle in the barn, and she was sitting on an upturned bucket, watching him with the intense focus she applied to everything. Carlos, she said. Do you want to marry my mama? He stopped oiling the saddle. He turned and looked at her. She was watching him without embarrassment, without shyness, with the absolute directness of a child who had decided she was old enough to ask the important questions. He tried to form a sentence. That's a significant question for a Tuesday. Is it a yes or a no? He set down the cloth. I think, he said slowly, that I would like very much to build something real with her. Whether that becomes a marriage is something she would have to want too. She smiles more, Chloe said. She didn't used to. Even before Papa died, she worried all the time. She smiled, but underneath it was worry. Chloe looked at her apple. Now she smiles, and underneath it is also worry, but less of it. Carlos was quiet for a moment. She had a hard few years, he said. I know. Chloe picked at the apple skin. She always said we were fine when we weren't. She thought I didn't know, but I knew. I knew every time she was lying about eating. I knew when the coins ran out. I knew when she cried at night thinking I was asleep. She said it plainly, without bitterness, just carrying it. That's too much to know, Carlos said. Maybe, Chloe said, but it made me good at reading people. She looked at him. That's why I stopped to talk to you in the street and not the other men. Because I read you. You were empty, but not like the empty men who are mean. Empty like a room that used to have people in it. Carlos held very still. That's what you were, she said. A room that used to have people in it. He didn't speak for a long time. Chloe, he finally said, how old are you really? She grinned for the first time, fully, with both tusks showing. 7, but I pay attention. He laughed, actually laughed for the first time in longer than he could remember. That evening, he found Mira in the kitchen after the workers had gone. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, and when he came in, she didn't move to leave, which had changed recently. In the first week, she'd always left when he entered a room. Now she stayed. He sat down across from her. Chloe asked me if I want to marry you, he said. Mira closed her eyes briefly. Of course she did. I told her it wasn't only my decision. What else did you tell her? He looked at the grain of the table. That I'd like to build something real, With both of you." He paused. "I know you still have reasons not to trust this, reasons that aren't about me, that I can't argue away. I know it costs you something to be here, to let yourself be safe." He looked up. "I'm not asking you to stop being careful. I'm asking you to consider that being careful and being open aren't mutually exclusive." She looked at him for a long time. "I'm afraid," she said quietly, "not of you, of what happens after good things. I know what after looks like." "So do I," he said, "but I'd rather try anyway." She curled both hands around her cup. "Ask me again in the spring," she said, "when I'm sure it's not the warm rooms talking." He nodded. "In the spring," he agreed. But she didn't leave the table. They sat there as the fire died down, talking about nothing important. The east fence post Chloe had found, the brown hen's eggs, the taste difference in the water troughs, until it was late and neither of them had noticed the time. Spring came the way spring always comes after a hard winter. Slowly, then all at once. The wedding happened on a Saturday at the farm, under the old oak at the edge of the north field. It was small. Owen and his wife, Helena, a few of the hands who had grown fond of Chloe and, in the quiet way of working people, had grown to respect Mira without ever saying so directly. Mira wore a dress the colour of the field in early morning. Not white, not quite green, something between the two. She had made it herself. In the evenings, in the small room that was now her room, in the house that was now her house, it showed, not the making, the care. When she came around the side of the house, Carlos stopped thinking in words. He had seen her every day for months. He had watched her get well. He had watched her learn the rhythms of the farm, watched her begin to offer her opinion about the East Cellars drainage, watched her and Owen argue productively about feed pricing on 3 separate occasions. He knew the way she held her cup. He knew the sound of her laugh, full now, real, not the careful small beginning of one. He knew her. But standing there under the oak with the morning light coming through the leaves, she looked like the reason a man builds a farm in the first place. Not the crops, or the cattle, or the cellar full of grain. The reason underneath all of that. Chloe walked ahead of her, scattering flower petals with enormous seriousness, lips pressed together, focused on the task like it was the most important work she'd ever done. The man performing the ceremony, an old justice of the peace who'd ridden out from town, reached the point where he asked if anyone objected. Chloe's hand shot up. Carlos almost choked. Then she said, in her clear, carrying voice, "I'm not objecting. I just want to say that my mama deserves this. She went through a lot of hard things, and she never stopped being good. And Carlos never lied to us. Not once." She looked at her mother. "So, I just wanted to say that." Then she put her hand down and resumed her formal expression. There wasn't a dry face in the small gathering. Mira's hands were shaking slightly when Carlos took them. He could feel the tremor. Not fear. He knew her well enough now, just the body's response to something it had stopped letting itself want. "I've got you," he said quietly, just for her. She looked at him. "I know," she said. The rest of the ceremony was simple. The words were simple. The justice spoke them, and they answered, and the oak shook its new leaves lightly in the late spring air. After, there was food on the long table in the yard, bread, smoked meat, honey from the market, a jar of the same honey that had started all of it. That first morning, Owen had carried food back from town. Chloe ate everything. People talked. Owen and Helena argued about something medical, and both were right. The hands from the north field stood awkwardly until Chloe dragged them to look at the draft horse's new foal, and after that they stopped being awkward. In the evening, when the guests had gone, and Chloe had finally run out of energy and was asleep on the bench inside with her head in Owen's wife's lap, Carlos and Mira sat on the porch steps. The fields were blue in the last light. The first stars appeared above the tree line, the same stars from that evening months ago when she'd started walking beside him and he'd followed and neither of them had said what they meant. She leaned against his shoulder. He stayed very still for a moment, as if moving might end it. Then he put his arm around her and she let him, and they sat like that while the sky darkened and the land settled and the farm made its nighttime sounds around them. Creak of wood, distant cattle, the soft repeat of wind through new wheat. On the shelf inside the house, on the small table near the door where it could be seen from every corner of the room, sat a small patched coat. Thick wool, sewn by hand. 3 patches along the collar, the stitching done with care by lamplight, by hands that measured their child by memory. It was the first thing Mira had placed when they moved her belongings into the house. Carlos had never asked her to put it there. She had just known. The last light faded. Neither of them moved to go inside. There was nowhere else to be. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-bound Legacy.